So I've gotten a wave of questions on this memo that four-star General Mike Minahan sent to his officers in his command. He's the head of Air Mobility Command, and apparently he said that the U.S. would be at war with China in 2 years and tells his troops to get ready. Now, the U.S. Defense Department said these comments are not representative of the department's views on China, and just a month ago, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said he seriously doubts there would be a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. So before I get into why I don't think this will happen, I'll speculate a little bit about why General Minahan said this. I think he's trying to motivate his troops by imploring some sort of seriousness into the situation, saying, we're going to be at war, train now so you're prepared. And it's a train as you fight scenario, and it's easier to train as you fight when you think there's a serious problem coming down the pipeline. So I think he's trying to motivate his troops. At least that's what I'm hoping, because it's very serious when a flag officer or a general officer makes some sort of sweeping comment with such pointed predictions, because then you get a shitstorm in the media, such as we've seen so far. So I'm hoping he just meant to motivate troops, and it got a little out of hand, because I agree with Lloyd Austin. I do not think the U.S. is going to have to deal with a war in China or fighting a war with China in the next couple of years. Now, the reason I believe this is, as we've seen with Ukraine, winning a war against a smaller country is not set in stone anymore. Vladimir Putin is finding that out in real time. Ukraine has a much smaller GDP and a much less trained force and a much less developed military industrial complex than Taiwan. Taiwan has a very strong military. And all of this I'm about to talk about, China knows this. They're not stupid. They're aware of what I'm about to say. And I think this is what's going to drive their decision to not invade Taiwan anytime soon. The solidarity we've seen come to Ukraine will be very similar to Taiwan, only the difference is Taiwan actually has military alliances with countries like Japan and the United States. And this is going to play a factor in China's decision-making. It's not just sending equipment. You may be face to face with some very powerful militaries, including the U.S., including Japan, Australia, Philippines, South Korea, etc. What this will do to China, and this is my second point, is it's going to weigh down on their economy. Any invasion, wars weigh on a country's economy. A lot of people like to say that wars will drive an economy due to the war effort, but when it comes to places like China, it will absolutely weigh on their economy. China's has a problem because their export markets are drying up in Europe and the United States because of their human rights violations. China has a problem with the real estate crisis, which is causing a drag on their economy. Therefore, the World Bank and the IMF are now predicting that China is going to only have growth between 1.7 to 2.7%. That's really slow by a lot of standards for China. And it's unsustainable when it comes to the way China tries to grow its economy. That type of slowdown is going to cause problems. And a lot of it has to do with their zero COVID policy, and they're kind of reeling from that. So Xi is going to focus on rebuilding his economy in a manner that strengthens it, and he can't have the drag of war on it. This comes because there's a lot of pressure coming from other countries that have things China needs, such as chip manufacturing capability. President Biden has pretty much put the kibosh on any kind of U.S. chip maker dealing with China. In fact, causing so many problems that many U.S. chip manufacturers have left China, as the U.S. is now pivoting to South America as its potential manufacturing base. China knows this, and this is a problem for them. This small amount of sanctions on China has hurt them. Could you imagine what a Russia's level of sanctions would do? It would absolutely devastate China. And I mean in a rapid and catastrophic manner. China cannot live on commodities the way Russia does. In addition, China has deals with many Asian nations, and I say Asian in the treaty, the ASEAN. That likely would be cut off, and they would lose hundreds of billions of dollars in trade every year due to this war. Again, China's manufacture-export-based economy would lose nearly all of the inputs needed to function, and it would lose probably over half the outputs as well. A lot of the countries that buy a lot of China's crap would come offline, which including the U.S., who is the biggest purchaser of such things. In addition, Taiwan and Ukraine are different militarily. Taiwan is armed to the teeth. Ukraine is geographically a wide open terrain where you can roll tanks through, a lot of plains, rolling hills, not a whole lot stopping a military from moving in, which is why Ukraine has done so well. It's admirable that they've done so well. Meanwhile, Taiwan is like 100 islands. It's like, and they all have some sort of defense capability. They have missile systems, rockets, artillery guns, and they're all focused on the Taiwan Strait because that's the only way China could come. It would take 60 days at least for China to build the combat power necessary to launch an amphibious attack across the strait into Taiwan. And because of that, Taiwan knows where they're coming from. So everything is pointed in that strait. And Taiwan is not rolling plains. It's granite hills where they have tunnel systems, and they've actually built in-ground airfields. So suddenly fighter jets are launching out of the side of mountains like a bunch of bees. It's going to be very hard for China to deal with. Ukraine had 8 years to arm in the face of Russian aggression. Taiwan has had 70 years. And they use powerful westernized military equipment, have a professional military with a navy that includes submarines, and Taiwan is on an island. You have to cross water to get to it. This is not the same as Ukraine. This is infinitely harder. And this doesn't even discount or count in the fact that more than likely the US will get involved. So will probably Japan, probably Australia, South Korea, and the Philippines. Japan by itself has probably a top 5 navy. The US has the best navy by multiple orders of magnitude. China would stir up a hornet's nest in the Pacific, and they're not prepared to deal with that. Plus, India and China have a border dispute. And if India sees China as distracted, they likely will take advantage of that and potentially start grabbing up that land, which is a problem for China. Internally, countries like Hong Kong, the Uyghurs might start causing problems. So they'd have to deal with that because a distracted Chinese government, the CCP, would be focused on this Taiwan thing. They couldn't keep the controls in place internally. Additionally, China can't afford to lose 5 million young people, that's how many would die, until at least they determine mitigating solutions to their demographic problem. You don't want to have a demographic problem and then kill all your young people. And I'm not saying all of them would die, but a good portion would die. That doesn't bode well when you have to support a massive aging population, as China is soon to be, if not already, one of the oldest populations in the entire world. Killing a bunch of young people just is not a good policy when you're in that situation. And then finally, this goes back to U.S. involvement. The U.S. does not need to directly attack or engage China for China to lose. Due to the infrastructure constraints that Russia and China have, where Russia can only feed a certain amount of oil to China, they cannot get enough oil to support the Chinese in normal operations, let alone in any kind of military operations. China gets 44% of its oil from the Middle East. It goes through the Arabian Sea. It would take maybe 2 carrier strike groups, and if we're feeling extra secure, 3 carrier strike groups to stop oil coming from the Middle East to China. 44% of Chinese oil goes offline right there. They get 18% from Africa. That goes through the Malacca Strait. That's covered by our allies, the U.S. allies. If not, we can blockade the Malacca Strait too. That takes 18% offline for Russia. They get 15% from South America, which is under the U.S.-Canadian umbrella for the most part, and the influence there. But if need be, that can be stopped just south of Japan, and that oil is gone. Couple that with the whopping 3% Europe provides them. In a matter of days, China loses 81% of its oil without a single U.S. shot being fired. That means within a matter of months, it's only waiting game for us, the Chinese economy comes to an absolute screeching halt. Russia supplies maybe 15% of the oil they would use, and they can make about another 8% internally. That's not enough. That alone, the ability of the U.S. Navy to control the points of exit for oil going to China means that China loses that war before it even really starts. That's game over. The execution of a blockade of that oil can stop before China even crosses the strait during the build-up phase. And that's it. China's done. So no, I don't think we're going to war with China in the next 2 years. And I don't think many of the bigger thinkers in this arena, both in the Defense Department and in academia, think that we are either.